right, here we are. We're in Fort Harrod, which is in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. It's named after James Harrod, came from Pennsylvania in 1774. This isn't, of course, the actual fort. The wood would have rotted away long ago. This is a replica built to resemble the original fort and to give a history experience of what was back then. There used to be, I remember from when I was very young, there was a play that was done here at one portion of the fort, and the play depicted the time period them coming here and what happened to the people that came.
Well, welcome to Fort Harrod. This is a replica of the original fort. The original fort was built in 1775, a year after the first 7 cabins were built about a quarter mile from here by the Big Spring. But with the coming of the Revolutionary War and the British paying for our scalps out here, Harrod knew he needed a secure place for the people to stay during battle times. So he came up about a quarter of a mile on what used to be a fort hill out here. It's gone now due to a rock quarry. But this fort is the most accurate you'll find anywhere in America. It's built from the original drawings and plans that are now in the Smithsonian Museum. And it's the only one built from its original drawings and plans. And Harrod built it to be a safe haven for the people that followed him out here. They didn't come here to live in the fort, they came here to get land. But everything from the gun holes at or above 5'4", which was the height of the average man, to the overhangs of the blockhouse, where you cannot climb up and over, to the downward slope of the cabin roofs, so that if they landed a flaming arrow, women and children could put it out without being exposed to the outside danger, allowing the men to stay at the ports and at the wall walks to defend the fort. And obviously it worked, because it was never breached in all its years. This was probably the first blockhouse. It's called the Harrod blockhouse. During times of siege or battle, it would sleep 50 or 60 people on the floor. That didn't mean you had a bed, it meant you had a space on the floor inside the largest, the strongest, the safest fort on the frontier. It's from here that George Rogers Clark planned and executed his Northwest campaign, Northwest being Illinois and Indiana. He planned it here, he executed it here, and when he came back, he brought his prisoner of war, Governor Hamilton the Hair Buyer, here, and locked him in our powder magazine. But he greatly underestimated the women of Harrodstown that had lost men, women, and children to the scalping, and they had a plan to kill him. Harrod heard about it, and he reported it to Clark. So under cover of darkness, from the safest fort on the frontier, they had to remove Governor Hamilton to safety, so he could be eventually traded for colonial prisoners. Feel free to ask any questions.
You mentioned the rifle that's back here behind me to someone else saying
that rifle is original to the fort. It was donated to us. It was actually inside the original Fort Harrod. It is not operable now, and from what we've been able to tell, not able to be repaired enough to be operated. But that's why we have our gunsmith here, is to repair and maintain our guns and make the occasional custom gun.
So do you know what caliber that rifle was?
I'm not mistaken, it is a 53.
53 caliber 53 rifle?
Flash pan.
And this blockhouse that we're in was also used as the armory or the gunsmiths, it says on the sign?
Right now our gunsmith, when he's here, he is housed here. But originally it would have been where Harrod would have kept his land records. It would have been kind of the land office. Fort Harrod lasted 40 years. That was very unusual for a fort on the frontier, especially a wooden one. They would last 8 or 10 years or get burned down before that. But when we became the county seat of the county of Kentucky for the state of Virginia, you had law offices here, you had the land office, you had the court system here, until they could grow enough around us and build those buildings separately. It had a function, and even after those functions, it was used at one point as a jail. It was used as a school. And Miss McGinty remained there until it was last torn down in 1815 after her death. And she's buried out here in the original cemetery.
Who was Miss McGinty?
Ann Wilson Pogue Lindsay McGinty came out here with her second husband, Mr. Pogue, and their 5 children. Her first husband and only daughter had died back in Maryland from a fever. And she had been issued by the British government a license to operate an ordinary, a store, a restaurant, an inn. And when she and William Pogue came out here, they brought the first spinning wheel in. He built her the first loom, and she was the first one doing cloth out here. She opened an ordinary, a store, a restaurant, an inn for the ordinary person, where you could get supplies, you could get a meal, and for a hefty little fee, you could get a bed upstairs. They had 2 rooms upstairs, women and small children on one side, men on the other side. Now, even that payment didn't guarantee you a bed, it guaranteed you a place on the floor inside the safest fort. And she stayed until her late 80s and is buried in the fort cemetery out here.
I'll
First
go out and
public
take a look at
cemetery.
that.
Yeah, you must go out because there's still quite a few markers out there.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Come back and see us.
All right, behind me we have McGinty's Ordinary, and you can see the sign up above the door. I had heard earlier from the lady that this is a person that brought the first spinning wheel into Kentucky. We'll take a walk inside. Big skin on the wall. I'm going to assume that that skin is probably either buffalo or bear. Guessing buffalo by the size of it. And here we can see the spinning wheels. It's interesting to me, the spinning wheels, because my wife herself spins and does textile work. She does knitting and many other things. The spinning wheel, you can see 2 or 3 different variants of it and how they spin the wool. You can see on the chair there, that's a card or carder, and what it's used for, and there's 2 more down there, is to separate the different fibers so that you can get them in a straight line so you can work them into an actual spun piece of string or piece of yarn. That's interesting to me. I believe that's a loom up there, a very primitive loom, but just with the sticks on it, you can use it like a knitting loom. And then you can see one of the cloths there made and hung up. You can see some of the woven things like the rug, but then beyond it, you can see the yarns that have been spun and dyed, and then you can see up there on the wall there's some threads all on spools. And then something more interesting, back up so you can see it, the whole thing, a huge loom. In fact, there's 2 of them in here. I'm going to try to get it, all of it in the video. I hope it focuses. Anyway, 2 different looms to actually make cloth with. And you can see, I'm not sure if they finished any. Yes, they finished some on this one that we can get a look at down there, and we can actually see there's a pattern to it. Zoom in on it a little bit so you can see it better. Anyway, that's pretty interesting to me, the different things in here. We'll go into the next room now, and we can see where...
You are in McGinty's Ordinary, which is a store, a restaurant, and an inn. And she came here with a license from the British in order to have an ordinary, so she got the biggest blockhouse in the fort. So Anne McGinty, when she arrived here, she brought with her not only her family, but she brought the first spinning wheel. She also had her husband build the first loom. He made the first plow. He also planted the first corn, and she made the first cloth. And so Anne McGinty was kind of like the queen bee of the fort. She took care of Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton. All the ones you read about in history were in and out of Fort Harrod. So it was the largest fort out of 3 forts, and it also had the most population at the time. So Anne McGinty remained in the fort where everybody else lived outside of the fort. And so she's buried out here in the first public graveyard, which she was probably the last one to be buried there. But Anne McGinty was quite the lady. She basically survived 4 husbands, so she has 6 children to basically survive. So we get her descendants today here at the fort. So we make baskets, do hearth cooking, natural dyeing, do candle dipping, spinning, weaving. So you just don't know what you'll see when you come in.
Was it wool that Anne McGinty would have been using, or cotton? Which
Buffalo.
fiber? Buffalo.
Buffalo wool.
Is that what's hanging on the wall here, a buffalo skin?
It is.
Ah, so this is actually the thing I showed a minute ago when I came in, is actually a buffalo skin. Wasn't sure whether it was bear or buffalo, but
Yeah.
shows how much I knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's about a 3-year-old. It was a 3-year-old. It's about 4 years old.
And I think you were telling someone else the candles that you have back there are natural beeswax from bees that were raised here in Harrodsburg?
Right,
Or
we have our own beekeeper here
on the fort or just nearby?
in town, and so we buy our wax from him. So the wax is local for our candles. And of course, in that period of time, they made tallow candles, which would be bear fat and sheep fat. But they also did some beeswax, but they would be special for special
When
occasions.
they did, like, I've heard of a thing called a tallow dip. Is that like a pan with just tallow, like fat or something in it that goes up through a wick?
Well, we dip candles, and so you would dip tallow candles as well.
Oh, okay. So
So-
it would be a fat-based
Yeah,
instead of a wax base.
right.
Oh.
hmm
Is that what you use to, well, I'll just ask, what is that?
It's a dipping candle. It's for dipping candles.
That's what I
Dipping
thought it
rack.
was. So you hang wicks over it
Over
at
the
different lengths
wicks.
and then dip them in the wax and keep dipping and then hang them on that to drip?
Well, you use that. In fact, they don't drip.
Oh, they
Right,
don't?
No. And so what you're doing is you put your wicks across, you're doing pairs. And so as you dip, the wax runs down to the bottom of the candle and stops. And so you're putting on paper thin layers. So you dip one rack, then you go to the next one, and the next one.
And let
you
'em
just
cool between.
continually. And that way you can get them done much faster.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we've come into a log house. We can see it's got a nice little cabinet with dishes and crockery on it. There's next to that a winder to wind your yarn on so you can do knitting. What's interesting down below is the wooden things. Some might not recognize them, but I remember from years ago, those are to actually remove your boots. Set one foot on one, step your heel into the other, and yank your boot off. The interesting thing as far as other furnishings in here is the lady next door told me that this bed and trundle bed, I should say, the one little one underneath for the children, the one on top, is actually from when the fort was here years ago. And apparently that bed has been on loan to the fort itself from someone for like 80 some years to be displayed here. Many other items around the room, including some cast iron cooking utensils. The fire where they would have cooked kept warm for what they could. And the mantle over the fireplace.